Hello, everyone. Thanks. It's such a pleasure to be up here and with such an amazing group of presenters. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this paradox that I've come to think a lot about over the past few years when it comes to disability, on going from special to suspect. And I have to say that the things that I'll share tonight are really kind of my own perspectives and my own thoughts on things. So when I was about 8 years old, I went jumping into the kitchen where my mother was, and I said, I know why I was born with a disability, which is spina bifida for me. And I said, spina bifida is like my shadow. Sometimes it's way bigger than me. I feel like I could fall into it and I would just disappear. And other times, like my shadow, it is so small I could just step on it and it would disappear and I don't even think about it. But I think I have spina bifida as a shadow, and it's so that I can also listen to the shadows of other people. And then I went jumping out of the kitchen. I was 8 years old, and my mother was looking at me like, what happened to this kid? As I grew older, especially around the college years, I did a translation of an article from a medical anthropologist who was studying convulsive disorders in the towns around my hometown in San Cristobal de las Casas in Mexico, southeast Mexico. And what he was finding was that when folks experienced these convulsive episodes, the townsfolk around them would say, this is because you have been touched by God and you are now a healer. And this kind of happened whether folks wanted it to happen or not. And folks would say, actually, if you don't accept this gift, you're going to get worse, you're going to die. And so I thought about that, and I thought about, at the same time, when they were not able to heal someone who came to them, they could be accused of jealousy or of witchcraft. They could be physically harmed, or they could be exiled from the little town where they lived. And so I kept thinking about how quickly we go from thinking of folks with disabilities as being special and then all of a sudden suspect. And this was something that I've seen a lot in the movies, right? We have no shortage of villains who have some physical disability that either they come by because they have been defeated or because their physical disability is somehow a manifestation of some moral rot. So I thought about this first in kind of a very theoretical sense, and it was interesting to have worked on the translation of this article. And then coming to the US when I moved finally in about 2007 permanently, I kept having these episodes where I'd be walking from a restaurant with colleagues and all of a sudden a person drove up right next to me, got out of the car, didn't say anything to me, but put their hands on my head and started praying for my back and my knees, and then got back into their car and drove away. And so on the one hand, there was that. And then I would run into folks who would say, wow, you're smiling even though you're walking funny and wrong. Clearly, something special is for you, or you are the manifestation of some greater plan. And so again, I kind of caught myself between, well, am I special or am I suspect? I started to wrestle with this on a very sort of personal level. And it wasn't just a personal level. I keep thinking about, in the 13 years I've been in government, about the importance of things like the Americans with Disabilities Act, which we are in the sort of 35th anniversary of commemorating, and how much this was kind of a momentous piece of legislation worldwide. And yet how 35 years later, we still run into places that are not accessible for folks with disabilities. I can't tell you the number of coffee shops and places where I go in where clearly there's been a lot of work put in to make it very nice looking, very elegant, but there's no button to automatically open or close a door, right? And the look of sheer embarrassment I get from certain staff when someone has to tell me that the restroom is down 2 flights of stairs and there's no elevator is something that I have also kind of thought about in terms of how we think about our policies. And then even on the international stage, one of the things that I was struck by when I was reading through the speeches around the ADA is how much this was kind of a model so that other countries could adapt their own disability frameworks and their own disability legislation. What was interesting, however, was in 2012, I got to go to the United Nations for a conference to countries that had signed on to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which had come around in 2006, 2007. And what was interesting is so many countries were saying, this is based on the Americans with Disabilities Act. Will the United States ever ratify it? And to this day, we have not. There's still kind of a debate about, on the one hand, we are kind of special for having had this initial piece of legislation, and very quickly it went into kind of suspect on how we think about international treaties and frameworks. I think I've been very surprised in terms of how quickly that transition can go from one to the other. And I think COVID was an interesting example of so many of the signs that went up initially about protecting individuals with disabilities, about kind of doing the things that we needed to do to protect folks. And at the same time, how, as time went on, folks with disabilities grew concerned that a lot of medical biases, a lot of things were actually kind of kicking into place where some folks were even saying, well, what kind of quality of life could you possibly have as someone with a disability, right? Maybe this is a good thing that this might happen to you. And I think going through this whiplash definitely has kind of this mental health toll, right? Of being at the same time feeling like a hero for navigating spaces that are not designed for persons with disabilities, while at the same time being angry at kind of the help that I often require to navigate these spaces. This idea of a very sort of warlike language that we have around disability, it always feels like we're fighting a war against one disability or battling another one. And I don't know that there's a lot of room for compassion in that sometimes when we just kind of narrow it down to these very sort of conflicting language. And I think in the end, also just caught between these structures that help and then these structures that kind of impede who I get to be out kind of in the world, right? And is there something that I'm doing wrong, or is there something that I just kind of can't overcome? So I think in a way, there's a way to start to interrupt that paradox, which is, I think there is a line between awareness and advocacy, and maybe activism as well, that kind of goes through this. One of the things that I've been proud to start doing is working on a commentary that I hope will be published soon by the Journal of Pediatric Rehabilitation, which looks at how conditions like spina bifida often have very integrated multi-specialty care in childhood, and then once you reach a certain age in adulthood, you're kind of on your own and you're trying to cobble together different medical care from different providers and different specialties that are often kind of not designed for you. So I think from wherever you are, whether that it is in that awareness, that advocacy, or that activism space, I certainly appreciate kind of all and everything that any of you can do from there. And so I really kind of leave you with these questions about how do you see this paradox play out in your own interactions, and how we think about people either doing something either because of their disability or in spite of that disability, and that tension of assumptions when it comes to how we think about that. And then how do we empower individuals with disabilities, maybe including folks here as well, while addressing these kind of systemic and societal barriers that still exist. I think that's something that I think about in the passage of the ADA. There's some very specific language about we have to dismantle these barriers that are both physical and attitudinal when it comes to individuals with disabilities. So thank you so much for your time, your patience, and your listening.